Hello everyone and welcome back to Rare Japanese Sounds, in another episode where I basically show you what I bought over the last 30 days and try to talk about why I bought it, how I bought it, whether it was on the internet, in a local record shop, and try to give my reasoning as to why I bought it at that time and whether I think it's a good piece for a collection, a good piece of investment, anything. So without further ado, let's get started with the first record I bought a week ago. And actually, I bought this one at a record shop at HMV in Shibuya. And it was during a sale that had just started 30 minutes before I got into the shop. And I was very lucky to find this copy of On the Beach for 1,000 yen, so about $10, which is really cheap because On the Beach is one of my favorite city pop compilations, maybe of all time. The reason for that is, if you were following me back when I had my previous YouTube channel, which I was just uploading, just rare Japanese albums, I had originally uploaded On the Beach, but back then I had the CD and I always wanted to get the LP for that album. So the album exists as a CD, a cassette, and the record, and I'm very glad to have found the record, even though it's just a compilation. So you're not missing on anything special by not purchasing the record. You can always find the songs on their respective albums. One thing to note, if you don't know the album at all, it's that the first track is actually Summer Connection by Taeko Ohnuki. Perhaps I need to do this in order for it to focus. Yes. So, a great first track, and you also have a couple of tracks by Haruomi Hosono, great artist again. So it's a pretty well-rounded compilation, but pretty much you would have trouble calling it pure city pop because it's more on the early side. But in any case, I think it's a great album, especially at that price point. And if you get the occasion to find the record, which is pretty rare, especially because it's a compilation, it's hard to find, I would definitely recommend that you have a go at it. Anyway, on the same day, I also bought quite a few records by Tatsuro Yamashita. And the reason for that is, currently, as Japan is closed to tourists, you have a lot less traffic in local record shops of people trying to find very popular city pop albums, especially Tatsuro Yamashita's records, which are in pretty big numbers, like a lot of them exist. I have to remind you that Tatsuro Yamashita was one of the main artists. He was very well known back then. His albums were regularly entering the top 50, 10, even 5 albums of all time. And the first album actually that Tatsuro Yamashita released that made it into #1, I think, of sales in Japan was Ride on Time. Before that, his albums like Spacey, Go Ahead, It's a Pop in Time, those albums didn't quite have the same amount of popularity, but Ride on Time definitely propelled Tatsuro to the #1 spot in Japan, and he has been famous ever since. Anyway, Ride on Time is an excellent album. I think the price right now is a bit expensive given the number of records that exist out there. But given that I found it for only 2,000 yen, or a bit under $20, I thought it was a great buy. And so I bought this at the Disc Union shop in Yokohama. So this one is not a very well-known Disc Union shop. People generally know about the one in Shinjuku, maybe Ochanomizu, the main ones, but don't really know about the one in Yokohama. It's pretty small, and I was lucky to find this as well as Big Wave. Of course, Big Wave came in 1982 or maybe 83. I think 83, let me check. 84 actually, sorry. So it was after Tatsuro became extremely popular, and Big Wave was also one of the top-selling albums at the time. And for those who know Big Wave, which should be the majority of you, Big Wave is basically maybe something like a sort of love letter from Tatsuro to the Beach Boys, and even like the back of the jacket is really evocative of what a Beach Boys album jacket would look like. And even the content too, every single song is in English, the first side being original songs and the B-side being songs by the Beach Boys. It's a really great album, and you should notice that you can find it either with a hype sticker on the side or a bit more desired with the pink obi. You will also notice that the pink obi is really subject to discoloration. I don't know exactly what causes it, but in this particular copy, the left side of the obi, as you can see, has widened in a pretty severe way. I don't really mind it because I'm more about having a complete copy. Even if it's not in great shape, I like, having all the elements of the original album. And this one I paid perhaps 1700 yen, or a bit about $15 for it, which is a great price. It's very hard to find that when you take into account shipping and all that. So it's one of the good reasons to go into your local record shop, is because you save a lot on shipping costs, especially for this kind of pretty cheap albums where like 20-25% of the cost is gets in the way of shipping. So yeah, it's a great album, but remember, Ride on Time, Big Wave, For You, all those albums do exist in pretty large numbers. Another precision I didn't mention for Ride on Time is the fact that you do have an outer sleeve, the obi, and the jacket itself, plus the inner sleeve. So for that reason, you need to be very careful when buying a copy of that. Do you have absolutely everything? And plus the insert, of course. It's pretty rare to find a complete copy that looks excellent. This one does have some foxing on the jacket, as you might be able to see. But really, I'm not about having perfect copies like many collectors. I just wanted a copy of the album to listen to, unlike the very expensive records that I buy sometimes. Tatsuro records, I just like to listen on my pretty bad turntable at my parents' house. Anyway, at a different record store, this one was Fuji Records in Jimbocho. So Jimbocho is perhaps what is the most historical district for vinyl records, and because it's also well known for its antique bookshops. So perhaps the two go well together. In any case, you do have a lot of interesting record shops in there, and Fuji Records is one that is right next to the Jimbocho station, and in there I was able to find this very nice copy of Come Along with a record in very excellent shape, which is not easy to find for a Tatsuro Yamashita record. This one I paid 3,000 yen, or yeah, between $25 and $30, which is a great price. No obi originally, at least as far as I know. And for those of you who don't know Come Along is basically a compilation of Tatsuro Yamashita's songs, but mixed together and with commentary added on top by Kamasami Kang, who is a DJ. I don't know if he's Japanese or American Japanese, but he does speak with perfect English. And you do have a few cameos of very famous personalities that appear in between the tracks. I won't spoil anything for those of you who have never listened to Come Along, but it will be a pretty nice surprise if you listen to it for the first time. Anyway, this is an amazing album, and it's important to know that it was released before Ride on Time. I'm not completely sure, but it was right before Tatsuro Yamashita became extremely popular. So it's an album that is a bit harder to find, and a bit harder to find than Come Along 2. Another cool thing to note is the cover art by Eijin Suzuki, a very famous artist for vinyl record covers, album jackets, and it's a huge recommendation from my part, maybe even more so than Big Wave, perhaps even more so than Ride of Time. And you do get like extremely good tracks all along, especially my favorite one, Love Space, first track of the B-side. Anyway, if you've clicked on this video, it was probably not for those records, but perhaps for this. So before you wonder, yes, this is the original release of Green by Hiroshi Yoshimura, and yeah, it's extremely rare. And this one I actually did not buy from a record shop, unlike the previous vinyl records I showed you here. This one I bought from Yahoo Auctions, which might surprise those of you, and I know you exist, that frequently check Yahoo Auctions for albums of this kind. In fact, you might have noticed a few weeks ago that a very beaten up copy of Green by Hiroshi Yoshimura was up for auction, and it ended up for about 15,000 yen, maybe 16,000 yen. I will show you pictures of what I'm talking about. And I wanted to mention that because that copy that ended up selling for 16,000 yen was not the original. It was the very recent 2020 Light in the Attic reissue. And I just wanted to mention that because it's extremely funny that people spent this huge amount of money to get what was essentially the reissue and isn't worth like a tenth of what they paid. So I really want to take this anecdote as a way to urge you to always be extremely critical of what you're looking at and how much you bid on certain items. It's not because other people are bidding high that you should be bidding high too. But on a less serious note, this one actually, you might have not noticed it popping up on Yahoo Auctions because the seller had made a typo on Yoshimura's name, and if you have the regular alerts by having the Japanese characters for Hiroshi Yoshimura, sorry, you won't have seen it. And I was just lucky to find it because of recommendations from the listing of the beaten up copy of Green. And I was just extremely surprised to find it on auction. In the end, I paid what I think is about market price, because I paid just under 100,000 yen or something like that. So yeah, pretty expensive, but in the end, it's like the pinnacle of Japanese environmental music. You get what is revered as many as the ultimate environmental music album, maybe even the ultimate Japanese ambient album as a whole. It's not as rare as you might think. It's just that recently it has become much harder to find. I would say in a year there hasn't been any single like good auction that has popped up and from which we can see the actual price of the album. So it's really up in the air as to what the actual value is, but I can assure you that it must be at least 100,000. As for the album itself, there are a lot of things to talk about. First, the fact that it was released under the Air Records label. I'm trying to focus. This label actually only published one album ever, and it was Green. Actually, they also released a CD, I think a few years later, but that CD wasn't as interesting as this one, this album. And of course, most of you probably know at this point that Green was originally, of course, released as a record in Japan with the pure synthesizer sounds by Yoshimura, but was also simultaneously released in the US as a CD and a cassette tape under the Sonogaya label. And all of Green's releases are rare, whether it be the cassette tape, the CD, and the record, but of course, the record has that additional premium of being considered to be the most aesthetically pleasing version of the album. Now, of course, Green has been released a few months ago from when this video is getting published. Anyway, the fact is that Light in the Attic has reissued Green with the same, almost the exact same art and same OB and everything as the original release, which I think is great. Nobody should have to pay like $1,000 to experience the album Green. But on the other hand, I think it will make more people attached to this version of Green without the sound effects. I know some people prefer to have the additional sound effects, but I prefer the pure sound on the synths. Sorry, it's hard to pronounce. Anyway, the real question is, should you buy Green if you had the opportunity? And my answer to that is yes, absolutely, because Green is one of the holy grails of Japanese music nowadays. It's also one of the holy grails of ambient music. And there is this whole myth around how Green became popular thanks to the YouTube algorithm. Like coming out of nowhere, you suddenly discover those incredible albums by Hiroshi Yoshimura. And I think Green is really at the top of the mix of popularity and rarity. You might make an argument for 9 Postcards or Surround, but really Green is what it's about. It's really the top of what you can imagine in terms of rarity and, above all else, desirability. So if you ever get the chance to buy the original, buy it sooner rather than later, before the price gets higher and higher, because people don't want to sell their copy and people just want more and more. My only disclaimer would be to try and be careful with limited editions of the reissue. You know, the ones on clear wax or green wax or transparent with green splatter. You know, there are several different limited editions of that reissue, but be pretty careful with them. You don't really need much else than the black vinyl. And I heard that only the black vinyl has really good sound quality, so take that with a grain of salt. I might do a video comparison between the reissue and the original, just buying the reissue as a way to compare the two directly. Anyway, that was Green. There is not much else to say about it, but I also bought a few other things, including a CD from Hiroshi Yoshimura, which is Static. Actually, I already have a copy of Static, which I might have shown a few months back, but I just wanted to put the two side to side to show you that there do exist different... Sorry, yes. Now that it's focused, you can see that the two copies are slightly different. And I actually didn't know that, even though I'm supposed to know everything about Hiroshi Yoshimura, of course. That's a joke, but it's really interesting to see that there are indeed a few differences between different versions of Static. That's only for the die-hard Yoshimura fans out there. But something that is extremely interesting, at least to me, is that I discovered like 2 weeks ago that there were other albums on the Misawa Home label, apart from the 5 that we discussed in the collector's guide for Misawa Home. I was pretty sad to see that my collector's guide is now obsolete, but there is actually a 6th CD that belongs on the label, and it's the Legend of the Dragon by Hongjun. Sorry about the pronunciation, but you might know that this artist also made another CD among the 5 of the Misawa Home label. But actually he made a 6th, and that album is usually known to be on a different label, but there was also a version of that album on the Misawa Home label. And you can see that the catalog number is, if it will focus, I'm going to spell it, it's a C32-5S, whereas I thought the label only went from C32SD 1 through 5, but there was a 6th one. And it's a bit like the K2 Daydreaming album. It's pretty easy to find on the Crown label, but there was also a much rarer version on the Misawa Home label, and it's the same for this one. Anyway, that's only for a very few people who actually care about this. And still speaking about Misawa Home, I found this CD on the Surugaya website. It's some kind of compilation that was released in 2006, and that features some easily listening / new age music of the time. I'm not really a fan of those artists, but I had never heard of this compilation before, and because I love everything about the Misawa Home label in terms of music, I thought, and because it was extremely cheap too, I just wanted to get the album just for my personal collection and maybe to add it onto Discogs if I ever get the time. And last CD I bought is this one. This one you probably had the opportunity to listen to it if you were following my previous YouTube channel. You will know that I'm a huge fan of the Shizen label, as you might have seen from my previous Intaglio acquisition. But this is just a simple CD of compilation of artists from the Shizen label. You might know that there are 2 compilations, about the reflection, but that there are 2 compilations by Shizen label artists. So this is the 86 one, and there is also the 87 one, and the 87 one is a bit more desired than the 86. I only bought this one. I actually have already a copy, and you can feel free to message me if you want to buy this one, because it was extremely cheap on Yahoo Auctions. Buy it now. So that's what I did, and it never hurts to have an extra copy. I will probably try to sell it down the line. But those are the kind of rare albums that I really enjoy collecting. And a pretty interesting side note is you do get an obi that sticks onto the plastic jewel case, and it's the first time I've ever seen that. I mean, apart from the Shizen label, I've never seen another label that did that. Let me know if you know another one. Okay, so we're done with LPs and CDs, and the very last thing that I bought this month is this pretty nice looking cassette. You might know again from my previous YouTube channel that I posted a video of the Sunset Hills Hotel album. So Sunset Hills Hotel was an initiative from Shigeru Suzuki to make some kind of easy listening jazz fusion album, something that would be pretty nice to listen to, and that featured a huge array of very popular artists at the time. And so they did several albums on the Sunset Hills Hotel series. I think they did 5, and this is the 2nd one probably in the series. And of course at the time they were released on both vinyl record, CD and cassette. And as always, as you might guess, the cassette tape is the rarest one out of the 3, and because it was extremely cheap I just bought it. I think there is a certain charm to having the compact factor of the cassette, and the history behind how people used to listen to cassette tapes. I think it's just cute as a format, but of course it doesn't have the same collectability as a record. Anyway, this was all I bought for this month, which is honestly already pretty good, and I have a few things planned for next month, but I'm planning on maybe stepping down, because now I have almost every album that I want. I have all of Hiroshi Yoshimura's albums, I have all of the Shizen label except for Reminiscence by Motohiko Hamase, and I only have a few various items that I'm looking for, maybe a few Tatsuro Yamashita albums like his earlier ones. It's just that I try to buy things that pop up when I see a good price, and hopefully this month it will happen too. But apart from that, I don't have anything that is on my urgent want list. Let me know if you find any good action. Let me know if you're interested in either this or maybe one of my 2 copies of Static. And in any case, this was Rare Japanese Sounds. As always, I hope you enjoyed the content, and until next time, stay tuned.